certainty that they need to invest, to create the jobs, to advance our economic growth, and create prosperity for our future.
The senator from Louisiana.
Thank you. Are we in a quorum call?
We are not.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. I have one unanimous request for the committee to meet during today's session of the Senate as the approval of the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that this request be agreed to and that this request be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, I wasn't here to hear all of my colleagues' remarks, and I know that there's a lot of concern about the end of the year and what might happen to try to balance our budget and give a solid platform in which this economy could grow. But one of the things that's holding us up is the Republicans' refusal to put any new revenues on the table. They have been adamant and wrong and hard-headed and stubborn, and they have been very obstructionist in this way by not being willing to put a penny of new revenue on the table. And as a result, we have come to a standstill because the income coming into the Federal Treasury to support this government is the lowest level since President Eisenhower was the president. So they can come to the floor all day long and criticize the president, criticize the Democrats, but Democrats just in the last 2 years have put over $2 trillion of cuts and reductions to some very important programs on the table. Some of us have even been willing to say, yes, we know we have to reform Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, and been willing to speak those words, which are not easy. But yet, not one single Republican leader, not one, on either side of the House or the Senate, not one has come to this floor in public, on this floor. Now, I've heard them say it in private. I've been in meetings when they've said it. But not one has come to this floor to say we're willing to put revenues on the table so that we can match some cuts and move this country forward. So I'm a little tired of hearing them beat up on either President Obama or the Democrats when they're more to blame for the situation that we're in. And the American people are getting tired of it, too, because they can understand that it really is not 100% President Obama's fault. In fact, when he took office, the Titanic had already hit the iceberg because they had run right smack into it with the economic philosophies and policies that they had. The ship was already sinking. But all they want to do, and it's either Mitch McConnell or John Kyle one day or the senator from Arizona or the senator from Kentucky, they every day come to the floor and just talk about how it's the president's fault that there's no way forward, there's no sure path forward, when they're the ones that have put boulders in the way every day. So I sure hope that the people can see through it, and I came to the floor to talk about something else, but I'm getting a little tired of it, hearing it myself, so I'm sure that everybody else is as well. And again, Democrats have put $2 trillion of cuts before this body, and we've implemented some of them already. But you can't run a government on 14% of the GDP. The average has been about 20 to 21%. So until they're willing to put some more revenues on the table, we're not going to get anywhere. And we're not going to be able to extend the tax cuts that cost people money. Now, I hope that we can do something so that we can extend some tax cuts to small business, which is what I came to talk about. And you, Mr. Chairman, know this well. Instead of giving some of the biggest tax breaks to companies that are the biggest in the world and put all their jobs overseas, I wish the Republicans would start talking about tax relief to businesses right here at home on Main Street. And that's what I want to talk about today. We have a resolution filed because it's Small Business Week on behalf of myself and Senator Snow, Senator Pryor, Senator Lieberman, Senator Enzi, Senator Kerry, Senator Brown, Cantwell, Ayotte, Reisch, Cardin, and Hagan, a very good representation of our Small Business Committee and others, Mr. President, that filed a resolution this week again, and we've done so every year since 1953. We've done so every year since 1953 to recognize this week or 1 week in the year as Small Business Week. And so that's what our resolution, which was filed earlier today, does, and I hope that leaders McConnell and Reid will take this up and pass it so that we can honor the 28 million small businesses that exist today in America. We've been doing everything we can, and I'm very proud as the chairman of the Small Business Committee that we've worked in a bipartisan fashion, for the most part, trying to give our businesses, first of all, the recognition that 9 out of 10 new jobs created are being created by a small number, a small number of small businesses that are fast growing. They are the net new job creators. These are the businesses that are going to be putting this recession behind us. These are the businesses that are innovating and adapting and changing and being more strategic and smarter, looking for those opportunities in all areas and in all geographic parts of our nation. Over the past few months, my committee has held 3 very special roundtables to explore strategies, tools and methods to strengthen what I like to call, Mr. President, the ecosystem of entrepreneurship. I mean, much like a rainforest or much like a desert or much like the ocean itself, that's an environment where many, many creatures or organisms have to live and interact. It's same is true of the financial ecosystem, the political ecosystem, society itself as an ecosystem where small businesses have to function. And in order for them to be healthy, there have to be the right nutrients, if you will. And so we've sort of explored in our committee, what is it? We know the United States does this well. We do it better than any country on earth, and that's one of the great strengths of America, is we really foster that entrepreneurship, free but fair markets, well-regulated, not too lightly, not too heavily. Sometimes we go a little overboard and we need to pull back. Sometimes we don't regulate enough and we need to step up. But that's what we've been exploring, and in fact, we've broken our roundtables down into domains. Basically, do our small businesses have enough access to capital? Do our small businesses truly have access to global markets? And what did we learn this year? We learned that less than 1% of all small businesses in America export. Now, with the market growing overseas and only a small percentage of the world market being now in the United States, we were at one time the biggest market when China was closed and communism was reigning in the Soviet Union. And, you know, the Arab world was in darkness. I mean, the market was here in the United States, but that's no longer the case as these countries and areas emerge and create markets of their own and opportunities. So one thing we learned is that the ecosystem needs to be stronger, helping small businesses to export. They don't have the back office or the expertise or 10 accountants and, you know, a Chinese specialist and a South American specialist. But we can, by being smart, help through the Commerce Committee, the Small Business Committee, the Small Business Administration, or maybe even through some of our research and development arms of some of our departments, really be the back office for small business, and we're excited about what's happening there. So access to capital, access to global markets, access to counseling, mentoring, technical assistance, and education. You know, I've had so many small businesses come before our committee, Mr. President, and say, you know, Senator, getting the loan from the bank was the first step, but if so-and-so hadn't shown up in my office from the SCORE chapter, or if I couldn't have reached out to my local university for my small business center there, I would never have been able to make it, because they told me what to do, saved me from making a fatal mistake, and got me on my way, or helped me to rethink my market during the recession, was how one lady put it before our committee, and said helped her remarket her business to now it was growing faster than ever. I think also, Mr. President, access to strategic partnerships. You know, we are not, no man is an island. We don't accomplish anything by ourselves in this world, and that's true of individuals, it's true of small business. So we asked ourselves, who are the partners, strategic partners for small business? And cities are doing some creative things. You were a county president. You know the things you did as county president, and your reputation is well known in that regard. States can be strategic partners to their small businesses. So we explored those opportunities. Access to government contracting. You know, the federal government and state government and local governments are some of the biggest spenders and biggest businesses, if they were businesses, which we're not, and there are clear differences. But if we were a business, the federal government would be the largest business in the world. It buys more goods and services, and we don't have to do all of that just with the big businesses like IBM or GE or Exxon or you know, Exxon or Mobil. We can contract with small businesses. It takes a little more time, takes a little more energy, takes a little bit different approach, but we most certainly can buy some of the things we need from the small business right down the street. And so we are shaping policies to do that. Access to government contracting, and I might say that Senator Cardin from Maryland has been particularly aggressive, particularly when it comes to contracting with minority and women-owned businesses, which make up a really significant and growing area, and very exciting as more women enter not just the workforce, but decide they want their flexibility, they want to set their own hours, they want to be their own bosses, they want to establish businesses that allow them to also raise children at home, to be there when their kids need them. So they find that small businesses operating out of their homes are sometimes the answer to that dilemma. We want to give them access to government contracting when, of course, they are capable and provide the right price. One of the big areas that we looked at, Mr. President, is access to human capital. I think you've probably heard, and many of our businesses are saying, why is it that we are bringing in some of the smartest people in the world, educating them at our universities to where they're getting master's degrees and PhDs in engineering and math and science, and then we send them back to the country they came from so they can create businesses to compete against us? Why don't we extend visa privileges to these master's and PhD candidates? That's a good question, and we have bills to answer that. We also want to develop a skilled workforce in America, and access to human capital is what small businesses need to grow and to expand. And finally, access to flexible regulation and smart tax policy. We're never going to live in a world where we don't pay taxes. It's just the nature of what we have to do to keep our government running and operating, which is a government that serves the people, for the people, by the people. But our taxes shouldn't be too heavy, too burdensome, and our regulatory regime should neither be too light, you know, or too onerous. And it should be just right. And it's hard to get that just right approach, but we're working at it every day. Senator Snow's been working on regulatory reform. Senator Warner has been working very hard on regulatory reform, and other members of the body. So the bottom line is, this is Small Business Week. We want to honor the small businesses that are really helping us put this recession in the rearview mirror. I want to ask the leadership to pass this resolution, very straightforward, non-controversial resolution by both Democrats and Republicans, recognizing this as Small Business Week. But I also wanted to bring to the attention of the body the conclusion, basically, of our 3 roundtables that we've held, and thank the members who attended. We had very good attendance at these roundtables. We've gleaned some excellent ideas about the brackets that I've outlined today, and have been in the process of filing over the last week and throughout this week individual bills that reflect what we've learned in these roundtables. We've taken those ideas, turned it into legislation. I'm happy to say that there's not going to be a big price tag to this legislation. It's not necessarily throwing money at the problem, although we do need additional resources in some areas, but it's just sharpening some of the things we already have on the books, or reforming some of our strategies, some of our laws, rules, and regulations on the books, encouraging by granting some competitive grants, some of these strategic partnerships with counties, cities, and states. So I'm looking forward to seeing how the body responds to some of the new pieces of legislation that we've put out, and look forward to working with my colleagues through this week, through this month, the month of May, through the summer, and into the election, to keep focused on the #1 issue on the minds of the American people, which is jobs, economic hope, and economic opportunity for themselves and their families. You know, Tom Friedman has been saying all over the world, when kids graduate from college, it's not a job they're looking for. They may not be able to find the job they're looking for. They need to create the job they want. They need to build the business, build a better mousetrap, think about a different way of delivering a product or a service. Think about taking a business that's just selling to a domestic market and sending it, you know, globally. With the technology, with the opportunities, many, many young people are doing just that. In conclusion, I had the wonderful opportunity on Friday to be in Boston, and took the opportunity on Saturday morning to stop in the Cambridge Innovation Center, which is the granddaddy of all small business incubators. Of course, it's right across the street from MIT, right across the street from Microsoft and Google. There were some young and exciting college students in the building. You know, you could either rent a little cubbyhole that looked like a little kindergarten cubbyhole when you were in kindergarten, just with your name on it, for a few $100s to get in the building, or you could rent a space kind of like a bullpen where you could be working, or you could rent your own little cubicle or private office. And thousands, literally, of young people were moving into that building, actually people of all ages, not just young people, retired execs who decided, I've always wanted to try out my idea, let me see if I can get my business started. I can tell you, even on a Saturday, it was very quiet. I could feel the energy in that building, although it was virtually empty as I walked through on a Saturday morning with the director. I've walked through the incubators in New Orleans. I hope that you've, Mr. President, walked through some of those incubators and helped to create them in Delaware, because that is what it's going to take, a strategic partnership between government and the private sector, letting the private sector do what they do best, but letting government do what it does best. And that was a perfect example of what I saw in terms of taking research dollars that are spent at MIT, moving them out to the universities, and then on to these ideas where they're literally being tested and commercialized to get out into the market, to create wealth and opportunity for the United States and for the world. So I am really happy to be chair of the Small Business Committee, Small Business Economic Growth. It's National Small Business Week. I want to thank all the groups that are helping us to celebrate this week, and most importantly, thank the entrepreneurs that literally risk everything to create their dreams and to bring economic prosperity, not just to themselves and their families, but to the nation that relies on them every day to do their very best work. We want to make that burden lighter. I want to help them in every way that we can in our committee, here in Washington, throughout our states, counties, and cities, to be the partner that they can rely on to get the job done. So, Mr. President, I don't see anyone else on the floor. Again, I urge my colleagues to adopt our resolution, and I thank all of those that will be speaking today and this week on Small Business Week, and I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
And today, the Senate's taking up reauthorization of the FDA's power to collect user fees, those fees that pay for reviews of new drugs and medical devices, including new health testing apps. As CQ reports, party leaders have been working on reducing the number of proposed amendments they'll take up so that a final vote could happen before the Memorial Day break. The Senate is out next week, and the House returns Wednesday. Votes expected today at 5:30, including one on the judicial nomination of Paul Watford to the Ninth Circuit, which is headquartered in San Francisco. And President Obama today in Chicago for the final day of meetings with NATO leaders. He's going to hold a closing news conference there at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and we'll have live coverage on our companion network, C-SPAN.
The Senator from Oregon.
President, I ask unanimous consent to vacate the quorum call and speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I believe the development of the Internet, its networks, and the digital economy is one of the great achievements of our age. The Internet links humanity together, facilitating economic growth, bringing education and health resources to remote regions, reshaping societies, and advancing human rights. While networks foster innovation, job creation, and political and social progress, networks can also be used by actors with nefarious motives. It is in our national interest to deter, detect, and destroy real and viable cyber threats, and to protect Americans and preserve the benefits of the Internet. Americans must not be afraid to go online. Mr. President, the Internet works not just because it is open to all, but because it is founded on the principle of trust. Users trust that their browsers are visiting real websites, not replicated ones. Internet commerce succeeds because people trust that their transactions are private and their financial information won't be shared with others. People trust the Internet because they believe their service providers work for them, not for their advertisers, not for scammers, and not for the government. Congress's effort to develop a comprehensive approach to cybersecurity must not erode that trust. When Americans go online to consume digital services and goods, they must believe and know with some certainty that their privacy is adequately protected. The content that Americans consume must be at least as private as their library records, their video rentals, and book purchases in the brick-and-mortar world. Our law enforcement and intelligence agencies should not be free to monitor and catalog the speech of Americans just because it's online. But the legislation passed by the other body, Mr. President, known as CISPA, would erode that trust. As an attempt to protect our networks from real cyber threats, CISPA is an example of what not to do. CISPA repeals important provisions of existing electronic surveillance law that have been on the books for years without instituting corresponding privacy, confidentiality, and civil liberties safeguards. It creates uncertainty in place of trust. It erodes statutory and constitutional civil rights protections, and it creates a surveillance regime in place of a targeted, nimble cybersecurity program that is needed to truly protect our nation. Now, unfortunately, S. 2105, the bill before the Senate, shares some of these defects. Currently, Internet services and service providers have agreements with their customers that allow them to police and protect their networks and users. Rather than simply allowing these Internet companies to share information on users who violate their contracts and pose a security threat, the House and Senate proposals regrettably authorize a broad-based information sharing regime that can operate with impunity. This would allow the personal data of individual Americans to be shared across a multitude of bureaucratic, military, and law enforcement agencies. And this would take place regardless of the privacy agreements individual Americans have with their Internet service providers. In fact, both the House and Senate bills subordinate all existing privacy rules and constitutional principles to the poorly defined interest of what's called cyber security. These bills would allow law enforcement agencies to mine Internet users' personal data for evidence of acts entirely unrelated to cybersecurity. More than that, they would allow law enforcement to look for evidence of future crimes, opening the door to a dystopian world where law enforcement evaluates your Internet activity for the potential that you might commit a crime. In establishing this massive new regime, Mr. President, these bills failed to create the necessary incentives for operators of critical networks to keep their networks secure. Now, it's a fundamental principle of cybersecurity policy that any network whose failure could result in a loss of life or significant property should be physically isolated from the net. Unfortunately, many of our critical network operators have violated this principle in order to save money or streamline operations. This sort of gross negligence ought to be the first target in any cybersecurity program. not the privacy of individual Americans. Now, Congress could target this behavior with yet one more rule book and one more bureaucracy, creating a cybersecurity contractor full employment program. I am not, however, convinced that this is a problem that requires that kind of solution. At the same time, Congress should not allow our critical network operators to ignore best practices with impunity. It's vital that they understand that any liability for a preventable cyber attack is their responsibility. There's not going to be a governmental bailout after the fact in the cybersecurity area. Shareholders and boards of directors must be vigilant and understand the risks to their investments. Executives must understand that ignoring critical cyber threats in the interest of cost savings and convenience will leave them personally exposed. Internet providers and backbone operators clearly have a role in this fight. When they detect abnormal network activity or have a user violating their contract in a way that constitutes a cyber threat, they can and should inform our cyber defense officials. If it's necessary to grant them immunity to share this kind of information, the Congress could grant it narrowly and with careful consideration. Mr. President, there would be bipartisan support for the proposition that the federal government also has a significant role that does not necessarily require billing taxpayers for legions of private cybersecurity contractors. The Department of Defense, the Department of National Intelligence, Homeland Security, and the Justice Department, 4 major parts of our government, all have cybersecurity specialists. The Congress ought to be promoting the cyber capabilities of these agencies and providing the resources that are needed to protect these networks. These federal agencies should do a better job of consulting the private Internet companies to better understand the attacks that are occurring every day across the net. Some of these steps, Mr. President and colleagues, may require legislation, but many can be carried out by responsible actors in the public and private sector without waiting for the Congress to act. However, the legislation before the Senate and the cybersecurity legislation that passed the other body leads our country away from the kind of common-sense approach to cybersecurity that I've outlined this afternoon. As they stand, these bills are an overreaction to a legitimate and understandable fear. The American people are going to respond by limiting their online activities. That would be a recipe to stifle speech, innovation, job creation, and social progress. I believe these bills will encourage the development of an industry that profits from fear and whose currency is Americans' private data. These bills create a cyber-industrial complex that has an interest in preserving the problem to which it is the solution. Now, in terms of the process, the Senate ought to proceed in a way that's open and collaborative as the Internet that the Congress seeks to promote and protect. On substance, any cybersecurity bill must contain specific and clear descriptions of what types of data and when such data can be captured, who it can be shared with, and under what circumstances. Anything not specifically covered ought to remain private. Privacy in the cybersecurity arena should be the default, not the exception. Legal immunity to corporations that share information should be the exception, not the rule, and void if privacy protections or contracts are disregarded. The Congress and the public must have the ability to know how any cybersecurity program that's established is to be implemented. That means routine public and unclassified reports and hearings to examine whether there are any unintended privacy or civil liberty impacts caused by the program. no secret law, Mr. President. Bad Internet policy is increasingly premised on false choices. Now, earlier this year, during the consideration of the Protect IP Act and the Stop Online Piracy Act, the Congress was told again that it had a false choice. The Congress was told it either could protect intellectual property or it could protect the integrity of the Internet. This was a false choice. I and others said so at the time because achieving one should not and does not require sacrificing the other. Now, Mr. President, the Congress is being asked once again to make a false choice, a choice between cybersecurity and privacy. And I don't think these two are mutually exclusive. I think you can have both. Our job is to write a cybersecurity bill that protects America's security and the fundamental right to privacy of our people. There is no sound policy reason to sacrifice the privacy rights of law-abiding American citizens in the name of cybersecurity. Mr. President, it's my intent to fight any legislation that would force members of the United States Senate to make that choice. Mr. President, with that, I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Indiana.
Mr. President, I rise today to talk about the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Administration Act and Innovation Act. I believe we're going to be having a cloture vote, procedural vote on that this evening, and I'm pleased, and all early indications are that that will pass and we'll move forward on this bill. This has been considerable time in the making. It is one of those pieces of legislation that has gained bipartisan support both in House committees and Senate committees, and it's moving through what I would call a regular process. We haven't seen too much of that in the last year and a half or so. This is a regular process, and for those who say Congress can't get anything done, hopefully with passage of this bill we will have taken a very significant step forward in terms of being able to provide and bring to patients, doctors, administrators and others across the nation new drugs, new treatments, new medical devices that can ensure better health, prevent potential terminal situations, and better drug availability and device availability to American citizens. So I think it's very important that we go forward, and I'm pleased that we've gotten to this point on a bipartisan basis. I think Senator Harkin and Senator Enzi deserve commendation for their work here in the Senate, and of course those in the House in bringing the bill along on a parallel track. The whole idea here is to continue to provide the safest, most effective, and most efficient drugs and devices for American citizens and citizens around the world. The two very important industries where the United States have been the leading edge of providers, and we don't want to lose that. It's meant a lot to our economy. It's meant a lot of jobs for a lot of Americans, and passage of this bill will continue, I think, what has been a remarkable nearly 3 decades worth of innovation that has taken place both in the biopharmaceutical industry as well as the medical device industry. Now, part of this bill deals with this situation of drug shortages. I've talked to a number of doctors. My staff has been traveling the state talking to medical providers, and there's been an alarming number of drug shortages in critical drugs, particularly those designed perhaps to deal with more rare instances of health problems, yet obviously important to those people who are suffering from those incidences of disease or health threat. It's been reported to me that that FDA last year received a record number of drug shortage reports, more than 250, including critical drugs used in surgery, emergency care, and oncology. and the problem continues today. But there is legislation in this bill that addresses that, and hopefully will move us forward significantly in terms of dealing with this current problem. In Fort Wayne, Indiana, my hometown in Indiana, Parkview's health pharmacy director said nearly 80% of hospitals consistently face shortages in drugs needed for emergencies, including cardiac and diabetic prescriptions. And this bill incorporates significant reporting requirements to the FDA that I hope will help mitigate this critical problem. I think it's going to be ongoing, and we're going to need to figure out ways to further address this, but this could be an important first step. Now, the whole concept here has been somewhat unique in the federal government. That is, the makers of the products essentially pay a fee to the regulatory agency for the regulatory agency to conduct the work necessary to gain the approval for them to sell their drugs on the market. We've had a situation here which is sort of a cornucopia of new innovations in drugs and medical devices, yet that have been delayed by bureaucracy or the inability of FDA to move in an efficient, effective way to run this through the process and put its stamp of approval on it. And so the biopharmaceutical industry has basically said, look, we're willing to put up either between $3.5 and $4 billion in new user fees. I believe it's over a 5-year period of time. Fees that will account for nearly 60% of the funding designated by the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. In exchange for putting up those fees, FDA has agreed to new performance goals and process improvements that will reduce the time for drugs to reach the market. So the key here is to provide the funds necessary to hire the right people and put the right procedures in place to expedite the study of and approval of safe, effective, efficient drugs that have been sent to FDA for approval so we can get them into the market. And of course the goal here is get them not only into the market but using them to provide health and safety benefits for people. The Medical Device User Act is also part of this. In Indiana, we not only have a very large biopharmaceutical company and a number of affiliated companies, we also have a vibrant and dynamic medical device industry. That industry employs over 20,000 Hoosiers directly and many, many more indirectly with good-paying jobs. And many of these companies are right on the leading edge of new innovation and new development. Included in the legislation that will be voted on is a 5-year agreement known as the Medical Device User Fee Act that improves the regulatory pathway for medical devices. This is the medical device equivalent of the pharmaceutical user fee. The device companies have worked with FDA, again, in an agreement which each side contributes. Medical device manufacturers will contribute user fees to go to the FDA that can be used to streamline, not compromising safety in any way, but to streamline the regulatory process so the approvals can be made. Why is this important? Well, not only getting these products into the market so that they can be used to improve the health in a safe way of our American citizens, but this is a dynamic export industry, and America has been the leading exporter of medical devices. I have heard from so many medical device manufacturers throughout Indiana that they're faced with a dilemma of having to potentially think about moving overseas simply because of the delays and the bureaucracy and the time lapse that exists for approval, where they can manufacture these overseas and get the approval overseas and sell it on a worldwide basis much more quickly. They don't want to do that. The United States is their home of origin. They want to produce here, but they have to compete with their competitors across the waters, and they are subjected to a lot less delay in implementing their approvals. And so to counter that, we simply want to use these medical device user fees in a way that will help the FDA review process and eliminate these unnecessary delays, unpredictability, and inconsistency of past practices. I do want to thank the FDA for paying significant attention to our device users by coming to Indiana, listening to them, a forum that I convened. There's been interaction back and forth, whether it's FDA traveling to Indiana or device manufacturers traveling here to Washington. And I'm pleased that within this bill is the result of all those negotiations and all those exchanges between the two. Let me just mention one last thing before closing here, and that is the medical device tax. That is not part of this bill, but as part of the so-called affordable health care bill that was passed, a 2.3% tax to pay for some of that bill was imposed, which will begin in 2013. That tax essentially was imposed on an industry that is paying its full share of taxes, contributing to the user fee, and yet was slapped on as a way, I believe, to pay for the health care bill. That has an enormous impact over a period of time on these device manufacturers and jeopardizes manufacturers' ability to remain based here in the United States rather than looking overseas. There's a number of states in addition to Indiana, and my colleague from Minnesota is waiting to speak. I don't know if it's on this, but her state also is a major manufacturer and innovator of medical devices. But California, Florida, Illinois, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Texas, Wisconsin will all suffer potential job losses if this medical device tax is imposed. We're not taking it up in this bill. It would obviously potentially derail the bill. An agreement has been made that it would be set aside. I know Senator Hatch is looking for, on our side, is looking for an opportunity to bring that up at another vehicle, and I want to support that. I encourage my colleagues to take a look at the impact of that fee on our ability as a nation to be the leader in innovation and export of medical devices. With that, Mr. President, I again want to thank Senators Harkin and Enzi for shepherding the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act through the committee. I think this legislation will help improve patients' access to new medical technology. It will protect American jobs and improve the FDA so America can remain a global leader in biomedical innovation. And I encourage my colleagues in the Senate to support this important legislation and yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I thank the senator from Indiana for his words. We both are from states that have a lot of jobs involved in medical device, and in fact, this bill is something that we worked on very hard. I'm the head of co-chair of the Medical Device Caucus in the United States Senate. This has been our top priority to try to move those FDA rules along, and this bill does that. It's an agreement, a rare agreement between government and industry, which is something that both parties want. We would like to move those approvals along for the patients, long-suffering patients who should have access to medical devices, and then also for the industry, where we've seen way too much venture capital money go to places like Europe simply because that process moves faster. And so this is a very good bill. And I'm so pleased we have bipartisan support. I see the senator from Wyoming, Senator Enzi, has come into the chamber, and both he and Senator Harkin deserve a lot of praise. Now, I wanted to focus today, Mr. President, on one piece of this bill, something I've worked very hard on, and it really came out of things I heard in my state, things I heard from pharmacists literally 2 years ago, things I heard from patients. And I got together with our staff. I see Rose Bowman, our legislative director, and Andrew Hugh, who did a lot of work on this bill, are here today. And we went and talked to all kinds of people involved in this, pharmaceutical companies. We talked to try to figure out what was going wrong with drug shortages. We talked to the people who were suffering the most, the patients. We talked to the pharmacists, and we said, what would work here? And the FDA told us that, in fact, when they did get early notification from pharmaceutical companies that there was going to be some kind of shortage, it helped. They were able to avert the shortage. In fact, they've done it successfully over 100 times, and they have done it many, many times with some key drugs. And the earlier notice that they have, the better it is for everyone, because they can, in fact, then avert the drug shortage, and that's what this is about. I will tell you that for me, this whole bill and this whole provision really comes down to a little boy named Axel Zerbis, a young boy with bright eyes, a big smile, and because of leukemia, this little boy, when I saw him, had no hair on his head. He and his family were thrown into a panic about a year ago when they learned that an essential drug, cytarabine, was in short supply and might not be available for their son, who, here they had just found out, diagnosed with leukemia, was supposed to start treatments, and then the doctor says, you know what, we don't know if we can start them. You should start them immediately, but we don't have this critical cancer drug, this critical leukemia drug. They decided they'd take Axel to Canada, where the drug was still readily available. And just when they were making those plans to go there, they found out that some of the drug had been located and that Axel could come in for his treatments. Well, that should never have happened, Mr. President, not in the United States of America, not for a family with a little 4-year-old boy, both parents working hard to make sure that their child could have health care, and then this happens. It makes no sense. Or the story of Mary McHugh Morrison, who joined me at a forum I held on this topic earlier this year in Edina, Minnesota. Mary is a woman whose cancer had unfortunately returned after a shortage of Doxil. That is a chemotherapy drug that had kept her ovarian cancer at bay. And in fact, this shortage interrupted her chemotherapy regimen. Mary struggled to find remaining vials of Doxil and then struggled with the ethical dilemmas of using the drug she found when others would not be able to use it. She literally talked at the forum about how she had personally called people, used connections, tried to find those vials, and she realized that when she got those drugs, other people shouldn't have that drug. Well, again, Mr. President, this shouldn't be happening in the United States of America. She shared her experience with us, and because of a few delays in treatment, Mary's doctor told her that her tumor had unfortunately returned and that she was then no longer responding to that drug. This past February, CT scans unfortunately showed that Mary's tumor size had doubled. She was immediately accepted into a clinical trial at the Mayo Clinic and began treatment. Fortunately, she is so far responding well and her health is improving. But these shortages, Mr. President, are happening all over this country. Every single senator in this chamber has heard about one of them. You heard Senator Coates from Indiana just talking about what he'd heard. And so the fact that we heard this first in Minnesota, I don't think is any surprise. We have an active state. We have people that believe that you can still make a difference. We have pharmacists that are on the front line every day, and they came to us to get this bill introduced. We heard from emergency medical responders who have told me that shortages have made it difficult to stock life-saving drugs in their ambulance. I've listened to stories from parents whose children rely on drugs to help maintain their focus at school. I've seen firsthand how doctors and pharmacists have had to struggle to keep their patients alive as they look for these drugs. These shortages have had significant impacts on these patients' quality of life, oftentimes forcing them to pay hundreds more for expensive alternatives, or risking their professional careers to adjust for their diseases, and spending hours and days just trying to find a way to fill a prescription. You know, when we are dealing with so many costs and resource issues with health care, the last thing we want is for our doctors and nurses and pharmacists to be wasting away hours trying to find drugs and then ultimately, in most cases, finding them. But this is no way to run a railroad. Across the country, hospitals, physicians, and pharmacists are confronting unprecedented shortage of these drugs. So those are the stories, but here are the numbers. The number of drug shortages has more than tripled over the last 6 years, jumping from 61 drug products. Remember, there's thousands and thousands of shortages, but this is 61 different drug products in 2005 to more than 200 drug product shortages in 2011. A survey by the American Hospital Association found that virtually every hospital in the United States has experienced shortages of critical drugs in the past 6 months. More than 80% reported delays in patient treatment due to shortages. For some of these drugs, no substitute drugs are available, or if they are, they're less effective and may involve greater risk of adverse side effects. The chance of medical errors also rises as providers are forced to use second or third-tier drugs that they're less familiar with using. A survey conducted by the American Hospital Association showed that nearly 100% of their hospitals experienced a shortage. 100%. Another survey conducted by Premier Health System showed that 89% of its hospitals and pharmacists experienced shortages that may have caused a medication safety issue or an error in patient care. It is clear that there are a large number of overlapping factors that have resulted in these unprecedented shortages. Experts cite a number of factors: market consolidation, poor business incentives, manufacturing problems, production delays, unexpected increases in demand for the drug, inability to procure raw materials, and even the influence of a gray market. Literally, people are trying to make money off of this now. They hear there's a shortage, they buy up the supply, and then sell it at a higher price. Financial decisions in the pharmaceutical industry are also a major factor. Many of these medications are in short supply because the companies have simply stopped production. They decided it didn't work for their profits to keep producing them. Mergers in the drug industry have narrowed the focus of product lines. As a result, some products are discontinued or production is moved to different sites, leading to delays. When drugs are made by only a few companies, Mr. President, a decision by any one drug company can have a large impact. That would make sense. To help correct a poor market environment or to prevent gray market drugs from contaminating our medication supply chain, we must address the drug shortage problem at its root. Last year, I introduced the Preserving Access to Life-Saving Medications Act with Senator Bob Casey. We also had the support of Senator Collins and others. This was a bipartisan bill that would require drug manufacturers to provide early notification to the FDA whenever there is a factor that may lead to a shortage. We also had support from you, Mr. President, as well as from Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut and many other people from across the Senate. This bill will help the FDA take the lead in working with pharmacy groups, drug manufacturers, and healthcare providers to better prepare for impending shortages, more effectively manage shortages when they occur, and minimize their impact on patient care. And that is why I'm pleased that the early notification provision from my bill is included in the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act, the one that Senator Coates and I were just discussing, and that we are debating today. I want to thank Senator Harkin and Senator Enzi for their leadership on the Help Committee in bringing this legislation forward and including my provision. In a bipartisan matter, the Help Committee brought together several working groups to address a wide range of issues, from medical device innovation to drug shortages. In the Drug Shortage Working Group, we spoke with experts from patient groups, providers, drug manufacturers, and the FDA to try and find an appropriate solution. Ultimately, the legislation now includes many policies that I believe will help direct shortages. In addition to the early notification requirement, again, the FDA is going to be able to look in our own country, and if they can't find something in our own country, they can look at safe locations overseas. You simply can't keep these patients waiting for their treatment. In addition to that, the bill directs the FDA to improve communications inside and outside its walls, requires more robust record keeping and reporting, and asks for studies on how pricing factors impact drug shortages. I believe that this bill represents a step forward in our ability to prevent these shortages, a strong step forward. With manufacturers providing early notification, the FDA's drug shortage team can then appropriately use their tools to prevent shortages from happening. As I mentioned, in the last 2 years, the FDA, with this more information, has successfully prevented nearly 200 drug shortages. Imagine the hundreds of thousands and millions of patients that has helped. So we need to extend it. That's what this bill does. One such example is the recent shortage of methotrexate. This is a very common drug used in chemotherapy to treat cancers like leukemia. For me, the most devastating part about the shortage is that I heard about it from the Zerbe's family, the family of this little 4-year-old boy that had to suffer through the shortage of cytarabine earlier. Only this time, the FDA took quick action once it learned of this potential shortage and worked with other manufacturers to boost production and help stop the bleeding before this became a major crisis. That is an example of what can happen with early notification. They're allowed to then go to other manufacturers and find the people that can make the drug, to get it to the hospitals, to get it to the patients. And today, with strong cooperation between the FDA, pharmaceutical manufacturers, methotrexate is available for patients who rely on them, just like that little 4-year-old boy, Axel Zerbe's. Together with Senator Casey, we were able to work with the Help Committee and in a bipartisan manner come up with a solution that would give the FDA more tools to prevent drug shortages and ensure patients like Axel and Mary have the drugs that they need when they need them. Recent announcements by the FDA have proven that early notification and cooperation with manufacturers have helped reduce the number of drug shortages by over a half. There have been 42 newly scarce drugs so far this year, compared to 90 in the same period last year. That's progress. While I applaud the FDA in their efforts to address this crisis, 42 drugs in shortage is still 42 too many for me. That is why it's so important to pass this provision and give FDA the tools that it needs to get the number down to 0. I understand that early notification requirements may be a short-term solution to a long-term problem. That's why I will continue to work with my Senate colleagues to come up with a broad, permanent solution, one that includes methods to address the root causes of drug shortages. It has been a long road, Mr. President, to get to this point. Nearly 2 years ago, I began hearing about this drug shortage issue. And when I first talked about it, some of the other doctors said, really, I haven't heard about it. Well, now 2 years later, they have all heard about it. That's why we introduced the Preserving Access to Life Savings Medication Act. That is why we came together to get an agreement in this legislation. That is why the President issued an executive order that pushed for more voluntary notifications from manufacturers, and the FDA released an interim final rule that broadened the scope of the current notification requirement. And that is why, Mr. President, it is so important that we pass this legislation. Patients such as Axel or Mary shouldn't have to be burdened with the added stress and worry about whether or not they're going to have enough medication to get through their next treatment. They have enough on their minds. So let's get this done. It's a great example of people working across the aisle. When they heard something from their constituents, they were willing to listen and put a bill together. Me, I'd like to have gotten it done 2 years ago. But later is better than never. We can get it done this week. Thank you very much, Mr. President. I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.